Morphternoon folks, Mark here, and welcome to the sofa. I'm joined today by a mug of coffee, because it's cold out. Fussing with blending and glazing and fine detailed freehand is all well and good, but I do need a break from it sometimes. So today I've picked out the web warriors from Marvel Crisis Protocol, and I'm going to paint them in a rough, sketchy graphic style. Graphic as in graphic novel, not the other kind. Although sketchy could go either way. Let's go! The Web Warriors mostly consist of Peter Parker, Miles Morales, Ghost Spider, Venom, Peter Parker again, and Black Cat. There's also technically Moon Knight and Daredevil, because they hang around on rooftops? Who knows? Anyway, having built them off camera, I primed the models that would be bright colours with off-white, and models that were mostly black with black. Then I painted the pale areas of Venom, Black Cat, and Miles Morales with white. Which was stupid for two big reasons. Airbrush paint doesn't hand paint over black well, and what was I thinking with the webbing on Miles? After trying to paint the white lines neatly for a while, I gave up, painted the whole area white to get that sorted, and then washed it with thinned down black to find the edges of each panel. With that tedious prep work out the way, I could get painting the fun bits. Starting with Venom would give me larger areas to experiment on, which is why I started with his face. Step 1 was the mouth, painted in a deep red a couple of times to get better coverage, before mixing some red and fuchsia together as a midtone. Except I'd forgotten I needed high contrast, so I added some pink to the mix and tried again, picking out the top edges of the tongue and the lines underneath it. That got a highlight of pink to define the shape and pale out the tip. As an afterthought, I added some small patches of white to make it look glossier, threw a flesh tone and dots of white on the teeth, and then moved on. The eyes and white symbol were pretty much identical. A simple pale grey, white top, and dark grey bottom, deliberately avoiding any blending or soft transitions. And with all those details out the way, I mixed up a dark blue-grey, grabbed a nice sharp pointed brush, and started stroking. I focused on the upper surfaces, going with the direction of the muscles, quickly blocking out the main highlights with overlapping lines and sharp edges. It looked a little unfinished, so before adding more highlights, I cut back into the dark grey with black to make it look more like scribbled pencil and less like a blob. I used a short bristled brush for it, so there was plenty of snap that kept the short squiggles straight and sharp. Since Miles was one of the messier primings I'd done, I figured he was next. I gave him a couple of coats of flat red over the whole of the white areas just to get it even and smooth, then used a dark red mixed with brown to pick out the shadows, as that would cover the base red more evenly. I tried highlighting with a mix of flesh tone and fuchsia pink, but it looked a bit weak, so I ended up mixing some baby pink and the mid-tone red in to give it some more saturation and intensity. Once I was happy with that, I had to carefully go back into each square with a tiny brush, with black paint, and then a mix of a dark blue and a grey, followed by the same paler grey that I'd used for Venom's highlight. His eyes got the same treatment as Venom as well, and then he was done. I really like models with only 2 or 3 colours on them. Ghost Spider is one of my favourite characters from the set, so I treated myself to her next. Unlike Miles, her webbing was too small to paint the backing after the lines, so I started there, using fuchsia, pink, and little touches of white in the upper squares. I could then use turquoise, grey, and pale blue on the shoes and webbing lines, well, not using turquoise on the webbing. I'll move on to the white. I started off like I normally would, painting the mid-tone and then working in the highlights and shadows, which quickly went for a sail on the SS Dogship. I pushed on, And it got worse. So much worse. Not only did it look fairly rubbish, but it was lumpy. I couldn't paint over it, I wasn't going to leave it as it was, but I really didn't want to repaint the pink and blue. Cue some airbrush thinner and a pointy cotton bud to very carefully strip back some of the white paint, hopefully without damaging anything else. I gave that plenty of time to dry fully, and then went back in with a quick couple of coats of white to get a clean surface to work from. Looking at comics, white is pretty sparsely drawn, just a touch of grey in the deepest shadows. So that's what I tried next. And mercifully, once I'd got it done, I didn't feel any need to go back a third time. Which just left a tidying up of the black, and a similar painting process to the previous black parts, only this time using purple to tint the midtone. I'm deliberately using varied colours to separate the models visually and avoid them looking like they all bought the same fabric for their outfits. After cracking that little white snag, I rolled into painting both Peter Parkers, feeling confident. I was getting this scribble style down. Having already done the red on Miles, I knew to start with a mid-tone, only this time a slightly darker red mix. It was getting annoying having to make mixes for each individual part, but none of my paints were a good enough match, so I was careful with the red not to spill onto the blue areas, as they'd... Oops. Like I said, any red on the blue parts would need a white covering to avoid...
Sorry.
For crying out loud. Past me is an idiot.
Well, future me is a sucker, so there.
Red under blue could make it go oddly purple, so I had to be careful. For original Spider-Man, I mixed purple into the shadows and a little flesh into the highlights. Amazing Spider-Man, despite basically being the same model except for a big explosion on his base, used a different palette. More brown in a darker shade, actual black in the panel lines, and a brighter highlight that contained more flesh tone than original Parker. Since I needed to cover a few stray red bits, I went with the darkest tones for the blues first. New Amazing Parker got a darker blue than the original, again to push the contrast so he looked more reflective. Both then got the same mid-tone to balance it all out and try and hit the right colour for Spider-Man's costume. The final blue highlights were sharp again, and brighter on New Spider-Man than original. After that, it was an identical process to paint the black parts and the eye lenses, this time with a neutral black instead of a colour tint. I basically ignored the bits of web and terrain on New Spider-Man for now. Black Cat. Honestly, kind of been putting her off. Mostly because skin is hard to do at the best of times, and having literally 3 tones to work with meant it was probably going to go horribly wrong fairly quickly. Still, I threw down a base coat, and then started worrying about important things like the eyes. Nothing particularly exotic. Black stripe, white stripe. Go across it with a coloured stripe, and then tidy the underneath up afterwards. Then I slowly worked up a couple of highlights until the skin looked about right, mercifully getting it right the first time. After that, it was just same old white process, same old black process, and then she was done. And all that left was the quickest part, the bases, which turned out to be a long and miserable slog, but hey-ho. In many ways, the bases were really simple. A quick bit of road surface, some pavement, and then a black edge. But all the metal parts would have to be painted with black, grey, and white, so the light was going to have to be spot on them. And then there was a giant explosion in the middle of Amazing Spider-Man's base. Thanks, atomic mass. After a whole afternoon spent painting just Amazing Spider-Man's base, because that ridiculous explosion took forever, I was finally ready to assemble them all and call it done. There were just a few final tweaks that I had to do, a few bits of OSL on Amazing Spider-Man to match the explosion, Miles's postbox, and then little touches around where the models attached to the bases to make sure the light looked right. Then I could gloss them up, matte them down to protect them, and the core of the Web Warriors was ready to roll. Oh, it is really weird to paint like that. I kept having to remind myself that everything had to contrast really strongly with the stuff next to it. Still, you know, I'm okay with how it went. It took a little longer than planned, but then it's that kind of season, isn't it, I guess? This was going to be my last video of 2021, but things got away from me a little. Still a holiday special if there's tinsel, right? Right?